Okey-doke. All right, so last class, there's a little review. What we did was we talked about the Gemara Nida. We had this fun little medrash that was describing the three fundamental levels, these three O's that we take before we're born, and they represent the three different fundamental levels of being alive: behavior, thought, and belief. A little refresher, the first oath was that we should behave righteously and not wickedly. That was the behavior. We covered the idea how, actually acting differently changes the way you think. That was the idea behind that one. Oath number 2 was thinking about yourself, even though the whole world is saying you're righteous and you're perfect, you're amazing, to always see yourself as a Rasha. And the idea behind that was never judging yourself vis-a-vis other people. You're always judging yourself based on yesterday. And the idea that there's always room to grow. It's not like you are really a Rasha, but that growth is infinite. Okay. And then the last oath that we took was that all these, all these spiritual concepts, malachim, spiritual forces, and your neshama are all tahor. They're all pure. And what we kind of got into that idea was inherent worth, that we are created as being Tzelem Elokim. We are shadows of God, and that's more than worth something. What we took out of these three different principles was that all of them were kind of a bit of a roadmap in keeping us on track in the halachas of Bein Adam La'atzmo, how we treat ourselves, what we owe ourselves. I like that idea more. So we really owe ourselves something, and I think that's an important thing to put on the table, especially I don't want to sound stupid saying this, but because I didn't grow up as a woman, I can't swear what it's like, but what the research shows is that women are very agreeable more than men. As a personality construct, as a personality trait, and there's a lot of different reasons why that is. Women have babies; they take care of other people, on a biological level, and men don't. Men are just disagreeable. That's why 90+% of everybody in prison is male. They're not agreeable people, and when you're agreeable, if you take the Big 5 personality assessment, it's a fun test to take. I scored pretty high in agreeableness. So I'm speaking a little bit from experience. The Big 5 is what it's called. It's the only research-based personality test. All the other ones are just jokes. They're not based on anything. They were never really validated. They're fun, but the Big 5, the Big 5 was actually based on real research. So it's nice to take. And all of those 5, it's agreeableness, creativeness, neuroticism, openness to experience, being extrovert or introvert. They're on a dual scale, so introvert, extrovert would be one scale. Anyway, so women are more agreeable, and so being more agreeable oftentimes motivates people not to do what they deserve for themselves. You're too busy giving, and you're not busy enough taking what you ought to take, what you owe yourself. So that was one principle we got out of this. And we're going to kind of develop that a little bit more. The second idea was this idea of discovering as opposed to learning from Piaget, this idea that we're more trying to, we more or less, a lot of what we know and our abilities are already, there's a biological base for them, and the environment nurtures them, helps them grow, but there's a lot there that just we're born with. We're not a clean slate at birth. And a lot of what we're doing in life is really discovering things, truths that we know in our gut, but we haven't been able to really verbalize yet or really clarify for ourselves. That was point number 2. What I want to focus a little bit more on is this idea of ideology and religion, this idea of paradox. How these three principles, especially number 3 and number 2, are really tackling with paradox. That while on the one hand we're saying that we are tahor and we're Tzelem Elokim, at the same time we're saying no, always look at yourself as a Rasha. That's a paradox. How can you be godlike and be evil? That sounds silly. So ideologies are just taking one narrative, and it forgets the other half of the story. Whereas a religion, the way I was defining it, more in line with sociologists, is that religion is more of a thing that is a fuller picture, a more holistic picture, taking paradoxes and letting them be together simultaneously. As far as halacha is concerned, the one little wrinkle I want to throw in, is that when we are working out different areas of halacha, well, we have the paradox, and that's kind of like the elu ve'elu idea, that two different positions are truth somehow. But in halacha, we actually have to make a value judgment. We choose one. So there's a little bit of, you have to be an ideologist. You have to, practically speaking, choose one side of the paradox when deciding halacha. But my own experience as a rabbi, you never just, there's no rule book, even though there's a Shulchan Aruch, people ask you questions, and I've never just given an answer. I always reassess, what is going on in the person's life, their environment, how do they feel about something, what are they thinking about something. There's just so many different factors, because life's a paradox. You can't just give cookie-cutter answers. That actually, when the Shulchan Aruch was written, that was the primary criticism of it. It wasn't like Rav Yosef Karo wrote the Shulchan Aruch and everyone loved it. It's like actually most people hated it because it simplified the halachic process and made it more like an ideology as opposed to a religion. So you kind of have to give the devil his due. We sometimes have to pick one side of the paradox, but don't rush into it. Okay. What I wanted to kick around today is this idea of our sense of self, the idea of what the Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov is, and revisit this idea of paradox. I spoke a little bit about last time about this paradox of life is biologically rooted in our brain. Our left hemisphere is more, you kind of think of it as the predator side of us. It's the side that collects information. It's the language processing aspect of who we are. That's the part of our brain that's more math oriented, very data oriented. That side of our brain recognizes detail, and that's where our positive affect comes from. Positive emotions are based more on the left hemisphere of the brain. That's exploration and being curious. That would be what that side of the brain does. It creates order. The right side of the hemisphere, that's actually our prey side. People, in human history, we are predators and we are prey. We eat things and we have been eaten. It's surprising, how many people are actually eaten by crocodiles today. People are food. We don't usually think of ourselves as that. And our biology is organized in such a way where we think that way. That's the right hemisphere governs fear and anger, all the negative emotions. It kind of looks at the world in general themes, looks for patterns, and it kind of represents this idea of, and it's more of an intuition as opposed to data. It's chaos. Looking at the world as being a dangerous place.
And are people tend to be more or less right? Do people lean on their left brain, right brain type of thing? Say that?
A little bit, not so clear. I mean, different researchers kind of say different. I want to talk about that because that's a cool. What happens when the left and right hemisphere are broken, are separated? Because there are some cases where people actually have to have a surgery to separate their left and right hemispheres. Usually it's people who are epileptic, and it's like everything has failed. I mean, they even went through electric shock therapy and nothing's helped. It's really desperate. And so what they do is they actually go in and they go in and they actually separate the section that unites your left and right hemisphere. So what happens? Life gets weird. What they discovered is that these two hemispheres of the brain are actually almost like quasi-consciousness. Like you have two consciences, so to speak, consciousnesses, so to speak. Where conchai, yeah, there you go, yeah, why not? Where literally people who, there'll be, a couple different things in the research they found is, someone will be like putting their clothes on, like pulling up their pants with their right hand, and the left hand will be literally pulling it down. Or, there was one patient who, with his left hand, he was like literally like grabbing his wife to hurt her, and with his right hand was stopping his left hand.
So insane.
It really opposites.
So this is people that surgery?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that like multiple personality?
No. Well, that's an interesting point because like what the research in this kind of shows is that this idea of Carl Jung put it best. I have a quote here. The so-called unity of consciousness is an illusion. We like to think that we are one, but we are not. So multiple personality disorder, that's a different problem. But the idea of having different personalities, you betcha. We have a lot of different parts of ourselves. So this level one, what I'm presenting is, these two different ways of engaging engaging the world as predator, as prey, as that which creates order or that lives in chaos. And those are two parts of our being. Both are consciousness in of themselves. And one little nikuda that kind of, it's not really such a link, but it's something to kind of keep in your pocket, is I almost kind of visualize this as, that's like the biological layer of who we are as separated beings, beings of contradiction. And then layer number 2 is Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov. What's that? And so I just kind of want to like put this idea in your pocket that came out of this research, and we'll swing back to it maybe a little later.
So like the Yetzer Tov is left side, Yetzer Hara is right side?
I have no. We're gonna what I'm going to be arguing is that these are two different polar opposites that they lay on each other, but they're not the same thing. So it's like sometimes that there's nothing inherently bad being a predator. Sometimes it's a good idea. There's nothing inherently wrong. Anytime you seek a goal, anytime you want to achieve anything in life, you're being a predator. Basically, you're going after a goal, you're trying to achieve it. That's not inherently bad. I like eating meat. I don't know about you. That's okay. That's fine. The spaghetti with meatball night from last session. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Whereas being prey, like looking at life in a more holistic way, well, there's nothing wrong with that either. But so it's amoral. It doesn't actually have, moral value one way or another. That's just the facts of life. That's level 1. Well, level 2 is Yetzer Hara and Yetzer Tov, and maybe we'll dive into it. But Yetzer Hara gets a bad rap because the way that I see it. A couple different mafarshim. The Emek Davar talks about this on, in his commentary describing the Dor Mabul. When in human history was the Yetzer Hara most successful? When it was able to destroy all of humanity? That's coming up in Parshas Noach. So you can learn a lot with, what is the Yetzer Hara from that story. And the way he kind of describes it's kind of cool because it's almost like he describes as though, well, we have a survival instinct. And that can be either this predator aspect or this prey aspect. Both are survival. You need both. But what the Yetzer Hara does is it's almost like survival on steroids. It's this sort of, you're taking what you need, that's survival. But then there's taking what you don't need. That's something completely different. And it gets a little ambiguous because in Bereshis Rabbah, there's a medrash that talks about that Chazal tried to the Sanhedrin got together, Chazal got together, and they decided, well, we're going to daven away the Yetzer Hara. Have you heard this medrash? So they get together, they agree, okay, they did the same thing for Avodah Zarah. So that's why people don't have the same sort of connection to Avodah Zarah, With that's also a complex idea. That's not so clear cut, but so they that was so successful, that worked really well, and so they said, well, let's get back together and let's do the same thing for the Yetzer Hara. So they did, and it was amazing, and there was peace on earth. But wait a second, people stopped building houses. They stopped forming communities. They stopped They stopped getting married. They stopped having children. You know, the things that make life worth living, we just stopped doing. So they got back together real quick. The world's not going to last long if this keeps up. And so they dove back into existence the Yetzer Hara. So the Emek Davar in his commentary is really focusing in on that idea that, well, it's not so clear that the Yetzer Hara is bad in of itself. It can get bad. It can malfunction. You can start, from a dogma from a psychological perspective would be hoarders. People who just hoard everything. And if you've ever known anybody like that, it's the hardest thing to treat, Agav. Where they just, you enter in their house and everything, every newspaper that's ever been written, this guy's collected and just stacked up, from floor to ceiling.
Buried alive.
Buried alive.
Wait, what's the word you said that the Yetzer Hara can get bad, but it's not bad itself, but
it's not bad. It's a survival instinct, but can at a certain point malfunction. Yeah. Gets too carried away taking. The idea I kind of wanted to mention, getting a little bit back, this is going to be connected to the idea of seichel, which I kind of look at as balancing these contradictions in our life. They found with the split brain research is that this is really cool. Basically, the way that you see is if you were to put blinders right in the middle of your pupil, so you're separating your vision into two with both eyes. The left side of what you see goes to the right hemisphere. The right side goes to the left hemisphere. Okay, so it just reverses order. So they were showing, written description. They had a written direction. Go get a can of Coke. And they would put it in the person's left side, so it's going to their right hemisphere. Well, the right hemisphere doesn't have any verbal. That's not where language comes from. So people would see it, and they wouldn't realize they're seeing it. They couldn't put it into words. They recognized the direction, and they would get up and get a can of Coke. And the researcher who was doing the whole study would say, well, why are you getting a can of Coke? Oh, I'm thirsty. That's interesting. And they did it with all sorts of things, like going to the bathroom, going out to make a phone call. They were giving these people directions to do, and they would do it, but they didn't realize the real reason why they were doing it was because they were reading it. Exactly. They were rationalizing their behavior.
So scary.
Wait, say that one more time because I missed the beginning.
That the basic thing is that the point I want to get across is in this study they were showing how people rationalize their behavior. Oftentimes we do things first because of our inclination. And here in this study they're getting a written message that only the right part of their brain has access to. So they're giving a direction in writing, go get a can of Coke. They don't realize they're reading it because their verbal powers are in the left hemisphere. And what they do is they stand up and get a can of Coke. And so the researcher asks, hey, why are you getting a can of Coke? Well, he doesn't realize he got instruction to do it, so he rationalizes and says, I'm thirsty. I have to use the bathroom. I have to call my wife. But that's not why he's doing it.
That's so crazy. Wasn't there propaganda where they would play a movie?
No, they wouldn't. Because when you separate the left and right hemisphere, the two don't communicate anymore.
Okay.
That's why. It's only for these people.
That's so crazy.
It's very crazy. So what this does is opens up a huge can of worms when we ask ourselves, why do we do what we do?
Wasn't there propaganda where they'd play a movie and every split second they would put words?
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, it's not so effective because with people who actually have their hemispheres combined, that doesn't really do much. You might get a little effect, but it's not.
So what you're saying is that basically we're in a cult. And then let's say we're in that
Did I say that?
God is like, let's say, what if we're like, it's scary and God is just all like, oh, I'm telling you to do this, but we think we're doing it for ourselves, but really we're doing it because like our mind thinks that like we need to be doing it, but really we don't.
Okay. So I'm actually wanting to approach this from the exact opposite angle.
Okay.
Because that Judaism is trying to liberate us from the cult of life. That's what I'm arguing. Because the way this
It's a cult.
the way
We're an anti-cult.
I have a story for after I'll tell you about. It's a funny story. Just remind me about my first yeshiva experience. We'll get back to that. But the bottom line is that, well, why is it not a cult? Because like we go after our inclination, our natiya. It's almost kind of like there's a great researcher. His name is Jonathan Haidt, who did a lot of research in this area. He's a moral psychologist, and the way he puts it, his metaphor is almost like these two parts of us. There's our inclinations. I'm not even talking Yitzhar Yitzhar Tovia, just like our full biological inclinations. It's like a big elephant. And wherever elephants want to go, that's where they go. And it'll turn left, it'll turn right. And the rider on the elephant, that's our intelligence, our seichel, well, it can't exactly, if the elephant wants to turn left, you're not, as much as you try, you're not going to be able to get this elephant to turn right. But what the seichel does is it makes sure, well, if you want to go left, fine, we'll go in this direction, and it keeps things stable. That's the rationalization. Another metaphor he gives is almost like the president's press secretary. His job is whatever lunacy the president wants to put into effect by law. The press secretary, his job has always been, whether Democrat or Republican, his job is always to justify the decision, but he's not giving the real reasons why. He's giving a rationalization that looks good for the public. So what we end up doing, most of our thinking, is really justifying our behavior, justifying our natural inclinations to people so we don't look stupid. That's what most thinking is, based on what came out of this research. So what I'm arguing seichel does, and what the halacha system enables actually, is to create a system that takes us out of rationalization and kind of forces the elephant to go through one particular hallway. It's like kind of boxing this guy in, okay? Like you're not going left, you're not going right. We're going to kind of focus you and keep you from drifting, and gives you an opportunity to think out what you're actually doing in life. This is actually kind of cool because you ever in the siddur right before Psukkah de Zimra, they have the Yud Gimel Midos, right? The 13 hermeneutical rules. So on that list is not reason giving. That's cool. We don't create halacha based on the tamei hamitzvahs. It's a machlokus in the Gemara. Is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Meir argue we do? This comes up in Shas and different places. And everyone else says, no, you don't. You don't paskin based on rationalization tamei mitzvahs. Well, because sometimes the tamei mitzvahs, maybe you're wrong, maybe it's not really the tam, maybe it is a rationalization. Because we're kind of built that way to be a little prejudiced based on how we're feeling every day of our lives. So within the halachic system, we actually take that out. We say, don't rationalize. And that's how we paskin the halacha. What we're allowed to do is after we have halacha set up in this more, it's like kind of like almost like mathematical, like we start thinking about like gezerah shavas and like this word appears here, and well, this pasuk is next to this pasuk. It's very mechanical. There's not so much room to rationalize. So the halachic system is actually taking out the ability to do that, to save us from that rationalization. So, kind of recapping a little bit here. So we have these two, our left hemisphere, right hemisphere, the two ways we survive in the world, predator and prey. We have the Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is survival skill. We kind of think
So
of...
it's the Yetzer Tov.
Yeah. So
That's to pray?
So I would think Yetzer Tov would be something along the lines of selflessness. Is more of a being a part of a collective. It's almost kind of like reducing your sense of as an individual and accentuating your identity as a part of the group. That's what I think the Yetzer Tov is mostly doing. So you have
To differentiate yourself as, what was it?
Okay, so it's being selfless. I think Yetzer Tov is being selfless. As opposed to Yetzer Hara is survival, where if you're surviving, you're putting yourself above everybody. You're putting your individual identity above everybody, because, man, you got to survive. Whereas the Yetzer Tov is the value that it represents is selflessness. Well, there you're putting other people before you. You're reducing your sense of identity. You're basically joining a group. Really, you're being a part of a group. Being a part of a cult. Yeah. Now the Yetzer Tov has really good press, and I don't think it's so warranted. It sounds good on paper being selfless. We hear that, when you pray, you never praise somebody by saying, man, that guy is so selfish, good job. We don't talk that way. But when you stop and think about it, being selfless is pretty dangerous. The more selfless you become, the more you put others in front of you. Well, that has consequences. Those can have deadly consequences.
Like fixing the mask for kids for you.
Yeah. Rav Schwab has a really, it's in English, but he has a really cool commentary on davening. Have you read Rav Schwab's on prayer?
That was his Rebbe.
Oh yeah, Rav Schwab's great. Yeah, Rav Schwab. So in the bracha of Yehi Ratzon, the last one in the morning brachas, the really big long one at the end of morning brachas, that Yehi Ratzon, there's a line that says V'chaf es yitzreini lihishtabed lecha, that suppress my yetzer so that I can be of service to you, or I subjugate myself to you. Would be a translation of that. So the question is, okay, well, wait a second. In that tefillah, we already said, Hashem, help me out with my Yetzer Hara. We already asked, hey, Hashem, help me out with my Yetzer Tov. We already mentioned it in that tefillah. So what's this Yetzer?
Help with your Yetzer Tov.
To help me increase it, like that I use it properly, that it should be more present, I guess.
So the seeds are more of a balance.
But this one is like, well, what Yetzer are you talking about? You already. I think kind of, yeah. Well, I think the way Rav Schwab puts it anyway is that this Yetzer is actually your Yetzer Tov, and we're saying sometimes our Yetzer Tov gets us in trouble. Sometimes we want to be too good. We put our nose in the business of other people where it doesn't belong. And we hurt ourselves and we hurt others. The biggest example of this is, and it kind of sounds heartless, but it really isn't. Obviously you want to help people, but challenges in life are what build us. And if you go around in life trying to solve everybody's problems, well, you're just stealing their problems. You're stealing what makes them become better people. Well, that's motivated by the Yetzer Tov. I want to help people, but people have to kind of, I'm not saying like be heartless. Obviously you have to help people, but there's something to consider when helping somebody. You should at least ask the question, am I stealing an opportunity from this person that they can face the challenge, they can work out the problem themselves and become a stronger, better person all on their own? Not to fragilize people is the idea. The more you treat people as fragile, the more fragile they actually become. Let me throw this out to you guys. When did your parents start letting you go out alone? What age? 15?
I had brothers, I think 13, we both went out.
13?
Yeah.
That's about right. That's the average for your guys' generation. Mine was 6. Right.
In Iowa.
Not just in Iowa, but I mean it may be a little earlier, but yeah. Well, the only problem there, you're gonna run into pigs there. I mean, like, you know, that's the worst that could happen. But no, the average in the United States was 6 years old in the, you know, for my generation. And what's been going on recently is that people have becoming, especially in the United States, more and more fragile. You know, the rates of depression and anxiety are growing. And other mental disorders aren't. So it's not like people are just more open about talking about anxiety and depression. There's something that happened in your guys' generation that has caused people to be more fragile. So there's a lot of research that is pointing to the culprit of parents overprotecting their children. And so they never learn that they're strong. And it was really because, you know, in the 80s, you know, people, the 90s, sorry, in the 90s there was a crime wave, and there was a couple there was a couple like well-known stories about kids being kidnapped. And so all parents were like freaking out, like, you know, I don't want my kid being kidnapped. When you actually look at the numbers, it's like maybe 100 kids are going to be kidnapped in the United States every year. 100 something. It's not a lot. You know, more. There's a lot more. I mean, more people I think die from Coke machines every year. Yeah, because you put in the money, you bang on it, your Coke doesn't come out, and you're rattling it and it falls on you. I'm not joking. Yes, yeah, I'm not joking. Coke machines are more dangerous than going out alone as a 6-year-old.
Classic Coke machine.
But if you like to
Who's the first guy to kidnap someone?
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. No idea. So the good intentions of parents, the Yetzer of parents, has damaged entire generation, made them more fragile, more susceptible to depression and anxiety.
But wouldn't it be? Let's say, I feel like it also depends on where you grow up. Because what happens if you're living in an area that happens to be more like a bad area? Yeah. Why would your parents like let a little, let's say, 8-year-old girl go out when there's also a lot of like stabbing?
Yeah. No, this is variation. There's variation based on, you know, obviously, you know there are places that are
no way you're correct because everyone's going to get child services called on them. Like, how could you reach?
Oh, it is a problem because you're right. Because in some places, I know in I think it's Arizona, they actually passed a law that parents can't be sent to jail for letting their kids go outside alone. They had to make a law to protect parents.
Yeah.
Weird. So I mean, there are ways of correcting it. I mean, like it's you know, word to the wise when you guys have kids, you know, don't treat them as fragile. You know, like the more capable you treat them, the more capable they actually become, the stronger they actually get. The same thing, it kind of came out with peanut allergies in the States. In Israel, it's something like people who have a predisposition to getting a peanut allergy. In Israel, like within that population, it's like 1% of that group ends up having a peanut allergy. Well, in the United States, it's 17 to 20%. What's going on? In the States, what doctors thought is, well, you know, if you're noticing, you know, you're nursing your kid, and you know, mom's nursing her kid, and you notice, oh, like there's an allergic reaction, you know, oh, you know, the kid's not, you know, having tummy aches and stuff. Well, you know, take peanut out of the diet. Great. Well, it stops the tummy aches, and you're able to sleep at night, you know, as a parent. But what ends up happening is that you basically curse your child to carrying an EpiPen the rest of his life.
My brother carries an EpiPen.
Yeah. Whereas in Israel,
for peanuts and fish.
For peanuts, yeah.
Yeah, what about bees? Allergic to bees.
Okay, yeah, there's...
Mom didn't feed you enough bees.
Yeah, we're going to have to... Whereas in Israel, it's 1% because how could you deny anybody bamba?
Right, that's the thing.
That's the thing in Israel. You give them more.
Everything has sesame seeds on it. My brother's allergic to sesame seeds.
Yeah.
Can't eat anything.
Yeah, you give more of what's harming the kid to make him stronger. So that's the Yetzer Tov.
Give more of something harmful to make it less harmful, basically, right?
Yeah, well, you know, this doesn't work for poison. I mean, like, I'm not like, this is not like a general rule of life, you know, like, you know, but it's something to keep in mind that this is the downside of the Yetzer Tov. So we have.
So should get a lot of bad things so that we'll be able to overcome them to become better?
All I'm suggesting is always ask the question before you help somebody. Are you fragilizing them? Are you treating them as though they're fragile? Are you stealing their problem as opposed to helping them with their problem? People need people. We need to help people. We need to be there for people. We need to have compassion. This is not, I am not selling a survival of the fittest philosophy. But it's stopping and thinking for a second, at least putting this in the equation. At the very least, because this is the Yetzer Tov malfunctioning. Being too nice. So we have this map of life here. We have our left brain and our right brain. We have our survival instincts, both as predators and prey creatures. We create order. We create chaos. That's kind of like where we play. We have these two inclinations. We have the Yetzer Tov, the Yetzer Hara. Both have their merits, and both can lead us to very dark places we do not want to go. So what balances the two? The two sides here of these two layers. Well, that's the seichel. Having a system where we can step out of ourselves, step out of our biology, step out of our moral inclinations of self-preservation and selflessness.
So balancing the two seichel?
To be, yes. That seichel is what you'd want to develop in order to live a rich life. But so for the sake of argument, it's rational thought as opposed to rationalizing. The rationalizing is going to be rooted in Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. It's going to be rooted in our biology, rationalizing our behavior, post hoc. But what seichel does is it's forethought before you start confronting your biology, before you start thinking about your moral inclinations. That comes before. Seichel is forethought as opposed to rationalization after the fact.
Can you also say seichel is more of like your common sense, or would you just more?
It's because that's like, what makes up common sense. It gets complicated because a lot of common sense is based on your biology. A lot of common sense is based on your moral proclivity. I'll tell you, like, for example, one thing that in my own personal life, if you look up Jonathan Haidt, he has a really cool website, yourmorals.org, and he has an assessment that can actually measure. He looks at like morality as having like 6 different factors to it, and what differentiates liberals from conservatives is liberals really emphasize 2 of those, harm and fairness, and really don't care about the others, freedom, authority, and sanctity, and there's one I think I'm forgetting.
Why don't you say liberals are more like free because they just don't care about, like, not necessarily whatever, like they don't put themselves in any necessarily box or rules?
Well, that's a part of it because they don't relate to authority as much as a moral value or sanctity, kedusha, as much. So like conservatives have a much more kind of think about it as like taste buds. Like conservatives have a lot more taste buds of morals than liberals do. So I actually, like, biologically speaking, like, I'm more of a liberal. Like, I relate very much to fairness and harm. And in my life, it's always been a struggle kind of relating to authority and sanctity and all these other concepts that are also equally valid moral ideas. And so in my own life, I've had to use seichel to compensate for my blind spot.
But don't they both have different kinds of morals?
It's level. It's not there. No one's going to have different morals. Everyone's going to have the same 6. It's just how much.
6 morals?
The 6 factors of fairness, harm, authority, sanctity, and all the other ones I'm forgetting.
So weird way to spell it.
And he wrote.
So he has this website, yourmorals.org. So you could take the test and figure out where you fall in your own natiyas. Figure out your Yetzer Hara and your Yetzer Tov with that moral test.
Wow,
but that's seichel. Like in my life, I really have to compensate with putting more value in authority, putting more value in sanctity. Those being on my radar, because left to my own devices, they aren't. That's something that my seichel had to develop in forethought, as opposed to just justifying, harm, the only things that are important are harm and fairness. That's rationalization. So that's why I'm saying like, that the fact that within halacha, I just love how this lines up so beautifully, because in halacha, all of those factors of morality that Jonathan Haidt puts forward as existing, halacha involves every single one of them. It saves you from the cult of. I don't want to like put down liberals. That's not my way. Because whatever. Like go Democrats. But like it saves you from that cultish thinking, because it's demanding a person to develop those other taste buds that you might not be born with. Like me, I wasn't born with them. Anyway, we're running out of time here, so I guess we'll wrap up for today. Any questions or thoughts or anything?
I like this.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool stuff. Okay. Yeah? No, you're good. You're good. All right. All right.
Tell your wife we say thank you.
I will indeed.
Yeah,
Take it easy, guys.